Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast, your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch.
And I'm Ellie, a sacred sensuality facilitator, a spiritual coach, and an anointing priestess. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It is a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realm of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey.
Here we'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and the ceremonies that will stir your soul. We're all about demystifying woo and witchcraft, making these ancient practices accessible to all.
So whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, we are here to guide you on your path to self-discovery, healing, and empowerment. So join us as we light the way
and invite you to rediscover your true essence.
Welcome back, Woo Crew. We're here for another episode of the Woo Curious podcast, and I am your host, Ellie, and I'm here with
Eileen,
my co-host, and we're here to talk to you about intuition today. But before we do that, let's talk about our magical moments from the last week. Has anything come up for you? Anything magical happened?
Yeah. On Friday night, we went out to do like a couch surfers meetup and actually got to meet a bunch of people and chatted with people from all over the world. I think what's magical is, and I always feel so grateful, and then also a little bit like, but I might know more languages if this weren't the case, but it is such a privilege to be able to go anywhere and know that somebody's going to speak your language. You know, that really is highlighted in these kind of mix and mingle situations where, we're talking to a guy from Slovakia, I think he was from, or Romania or somewhere, somebody else from Russia who lived in Poland. We were speaking to somebody from Germany, obviously lots of people from Spanish-speaking countries, and they all had English as a second or potentially third or fourth language. And we just get to rock up and be like, yo, we're gonna speak her. Hi.
Native English speaker, don't speak anything else.
Don't speak anything else. Actually, though, there was a guy there who was from Montreal, and right as we were leaving, I got to speak in French to him. I was like, I do have another language, I just can't use it here.
Amazing.
So, yeah. So the magic of language, it's pretty cool to think about all the different ways that humans speak to one another and all the ideas that can get conveyed, and the randomness of these sounds that humans created to communicate
that we then put meaning to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I took a couple of linguistics courses when I was in my first degree in university, and it was always just such a fascinating topic. What about you? What was your magical moment? Was it the farm that you visited?
Yeah. Okay, so my magical moment is that I got to hang out with some farm animals this last week. After we recorded last week's episode, I hopped in the car and I went down to a friend's place, her farm, that she is called Nama Stables, which I just love. And she has some mini ponies, and she has a horse who is called a drum horse, Matilda. I'm going to speak more about Matilda. And she has 2 potbelly pigs and a baby horse that is being housed there. And there's an alpaca and there's some ducks. And it was just the most magical experience. And I've had the privilege of teaching yoga to some people who were very highly competitive horse jumpers in the world. Hi, Amy, if you're listening to this. And then I taught in a town previously. I owned a yoga studio, and in that town, it was just like full of what we called horsey people. It was just tons. It was crazy. There was a bunch of Olympians and a bunch of horsey people that lived in that town. And so I taught at stables, I taught at people's fields, I taught in people's like above the barn, in the guest house, and I really love the barn experience, even though I am literally petrified of horses. They're probably one of my most favorite animals. And you can stay over there. I'll be over here. Okay, thanks. I just want to watch you. And so I got to meet Matilda first, and she's the most beautiful painted horse, like literally black and white, is super glamorous, has been in print media before. Like she's a looker. She's got a modeling career and was so lovely and so gentle. And a nickname for her is Matilda the Destroyer, because apparently when she gets in a mood, she's just like, I will take you down. And so she's taken down a fence before, and while we turned her out into the indoor arena area, she clomped her hoof on the metal gate at one end of the arena and spooked herself and decided that she was going to hightail it to the other side of the arena, and then got all of the other animals excited in this frenzy. It was lovely. So I got to meet Matilda and brush her, which was an experience. I'll post some pictures to our Instagram so that you can see this. And then I got to meet the mini ponies, and they were a riot. And I have gone back to my retirement plan of wanting a mini pony, actually 6 if possible, to trail me in a wagon. And my friend, who is a very avid horse person, she was like, okay, so you're afraid of horses. You want to shrink the attitude of a large horse down into a mini, and then you want 6 of them to tow you in a carriage. And I was like, yeah, we need to rethink this.
Did you know they can be housebroken?
Yeah. I do really want a house pony. Now my Instagram For You page is just all horses and dogs. It's like we've switched over completely. The algorithm is like, oh, horsey person, here we go. We have everything.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny that you say you're like, I want them to pull me. I grew up riding. My mom teaches horseback riding lessons. So like I grew up on horses. Zero fear of them. However, I've been in a buggy a couple of times with my hands on the reins, and I feel like terrified. There's no control. How do I control the horse with just my hands? Like, I'm so used to having
right, because you don't have your feet, your legs.
Yeah, like I'm so used to having my whole body like in contact with the horse. So to only be connected by these reins, it just feels absolutely like, ah.
And for me, I've sat on a horse. Well, I've actually been on a horse a few times and been backed off. My cousin can attest to this. It's, she had a dog who barked at the horse, and the 2 times that I got on, I fell off pretty much the back of the horse, and it was an experience in my life, And then as an adult, I sat on a horse once because I just felt the need to sit on the horse, to get back on the horse. And now I actually, every now and again, have this moment in time where I'm like, yeah, I'm actually going to ride a horse. And then I'm like, oh, we need to start brushing horses just on a regular basis. Let's start there. Let's begin there. But I got to feed everybody apples and carrots, and it was a really exciting day. I got to make friends with the alpaca, who does not think that he's friends with me, and her potbelly pigs sit for treats.
Oh my gosh, I love pigs.
They were the most darling. And then I was jokingly saying, goes to the farm once and then becomes a cowgirl. Pretty much bought myself a wild rag, and now I'm just like, it's just cowboy fashion from here on in.
Yeah, the fringe on the bottom of your current robe is perfect.
Exactly. I'm there. I'm looking for, if anybody knows, I'm looking for a leather fringe jacket.
Yes, I believe we've mentioned that on here before. We're going to keep mentioning it until somebody hooks Ellie up with the black fringe leather everywhere.
Yes. I would also take a white leather, but really I'm looking for black leather.
Yeah.
So it was so magical. It was such a great experience.
Shall we dive into today's topic?
Let's. So start us off with intuition. Give us an opening.
Yeah, sure. So we've covered the topic of intuition before, and it's gonna keep coming back and coming up. But really, we did those 3 little mini-sodes around Christmas, but we didn't give it a full episode to dive in. So we wanted to circle back to this, touch on it a little bit more. If you've been listening to podcasts or in my world at all for any length of time, you'll probably have heard me say, let yourself be right. And often what I'm referring to when I say that is listening to your intuition. And so intuition is really just this inner knowing. It is an inner sense of right or wrong, of go towards or move away from. It is infinitely wise. It is so powerful. And it's been the thing that's been absolutely squashed by the patriarchy for as long as they've been squashing us. As long as the patriarchy existed, they were like, we got to get rid of this shit that women can do because they're far too powerful with their intuition.
It's true. I also find that the most powerful quality that we have when we're in our divine feminine is that access to our intuition. And once we know what it is, which we'll talk about, and once we know how to access it, we'll also talk about that. It's quick and it is
so potent. It's so funny when you're not practiced at listening to it because you grew up in this society, in this culture that really teaches us to distrust it, to ignore it, to not listen to it when we do hear it. But it feels like something that it's magic. And it's amazing how obvious it is. There is a deep power there. And once you recognize it and once you can tap into it and feel it, it's impossible not to notice it.
It's so true. Shall we talk about the 5 clairs? And I think that we can expand on this whole like noticing it.
Yeah, sure. The clairs are different ways that people receive messages, guidance, and also their intuition. Do you want to run us through the 5 clairs?
Yeah, sure. So we have clairvoyant, which is seeing our messages, our hits, if you will. Clairaudient, which is hearing things. Clairsentient, which is feeling things. Claircognizance, which is knowing things. And clairalience, which is smelling and tasting. We get those hits. Most people have a combination of 2 of these that they have access to, like predominantly, but we actually can have access to all of them.
It's really interesting. Every now and then I will get a real smell hit. I had one while we were waiting to record, but it was like whoa, what am I smelling? It was an immediate sense, but it is the least common of the clairs. Like that's the one, the smell taste one is the least common or the least predominant amongst them for sure. And there's like obviously nuance here because okay, so clairsentient feeling, we mean like actual like touch, feeling, sentience, a felt sense of some description in your body. Whereas that claircognizance is just that, I don't know why I know, I just know. I don't have there's no like tug in your belly, which is often where people will feel that intuition is that like gut sense, right? That gut feeling. That's one of the most visceral ways to describe intuition for a lot of people. Whereas claircognizance is just like, I just know. Don't know why I know. Can't explain it. Just do. What would you say your strongest clair is, or do you know?
I hear things. And they often, we're going to talk about like, how do we know what we know? I hear things and they usually come in a voice that is not my own. It's not necessarily actually, if I'm to describe this, it's not like I hear someone talking. How do I describe this? It's like I know the words that are coming out, like that are being said, but I don't necessarily see them written out. Sometimes I do. But most of the time, I actually just hear the knowingness of the message. Now take that and do what you will with it.
I love that you're struggling to describe it because it is so hard to describe. As you're saying that, I'm like, oh, I don't think I get clairaudience at all. But then as you're describing, I recognize that, oh, yeah, I do. So for me, if it's my own self, my own intuition telling me to do something, go towards something, whatever, it's a combo of kind of that clairsentient, claircognizance. There is like that knowing, and I often feel like it's in my guts. They are what knows. But when I'm working, when I'm doing my healings, and I'm in somebody's energy, it is so visual for me. It's very much the clairvoyant side of things, but I also get messages. And for me, they're just like, it's not like somebody spoke it because they take no time. It's like they arrive fully formed in my head as a sentence.
Yes. That's a great way to say that. They arrived fully formed in my head.
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like a translator.
Yes, I know. The amount of notes I take when I'm doing a healing for somebody, it's wild. I'm just like, well, I got things to say. Well, I don't know. It's not me. I don't have things to say. Somebody's got things to say. You need to hear them. I'm going to write them down for you.
Yeah. Yeah, when I tap into my own intuition, those are the two predominant ones. But whenever I see things, I literally see things. So if I'm seeing, like I've talked about before, about like, I see dead people. And so if that's the case, then it's definitely a visual. It's wholeheartedly visual. And it's like, it's eyes open visual. It can be eyes closed as well, but it's an eye open visual of something that is literally, in quotations, not there.
Yeah, the clairvoyant piece is such a fascinating one to me, because for me, when I see things with my eyes open, my sense is stronger when with my eyes closed. I tend to work with my eyes closed. It's just easier to shut out the distractions. But I can allow myself to see them with my eyes open, but it's kind of like the way that those sentences land fully formed in my head. It's like they're there, but they're not there in the same way that this is here, right? Like I'm picking up my phone for those of you who are not watching this on YouTube, which is most of you. It's not like solid, but it's there.
How do you describe something that is indescribable? Let us tell you.
Let's tell you. Now, circling back to intuition, and specifically, and I think we're going to do a whole episode on the clairs because they're really interesting, and it would be lovely to go deeper into them and bring forward some more stories. But most people, as I said, it's a bit of a felt sense, right? For that kind of, ooh, that's a bad idea. Ooh, I don't like that person. I don't think we should go this way. Or the opposite, I really like this person, or this seems like a great opportunity. That tends to be felt in the body, either as that clairsentience, that feeling, that tugging in your guts, or just like I know. Don't know why I know, but I know. I would say are probably the most common for people. And that makes it really hard to distinguish from fear and from conditioning, especially when you have been taught your whole life not to listen to it. Right? That we need to have this scientific, rational explanation for things. You know, I don't want to go that way. And your partner's like, why not? It's faster. And you're like, I don't have a reason. I just know I don't want to go that way. Doesn't tend to fly. And so we squash it. We don't speak up about it. We don't trust it because nobody around us has trusted it for most of our lives, or at least very few people around us have done.
I think this is a key word here as well. Like, is that we don't trust it. We've been taught not to trust it. We've been taught to question it. We've been taught to kind of, like you said, like stuff it back. And that is definitely something that disconnects us even further from our intuition.
Again, coming back to the same thing without being, as we talked about, feeling your feelings, you disconnect yourself from your feelings, and intuition is kind of a feeling. It's tangible and yet not. Amorphous.
Alchemical,
exactly.
I also want to mention here there's a distinguish what a lot of people, whenever they first start to tap into their intuition, especially if they have that clairaudience, they have a question of like, how do I know it's not just my voice, or it's not just my mother speaking to me, say, for example. And often, like, how we can distinguish our ego from our intuition is that our intuition is never critical. It's not critical of whatever it is that we're doing. It's always supportive. It's always like affirmative. It's always, you know, and could there be moments where we hear like, don't go that way? Yes. And that's more affirming than critical. So it's really a tuning of your ears to understand whether it is your ego that's speaking or it's your intuition. And there's a softness to it. There's not a brash harshness necessarily. There's a softness. Again, the divine feminine energy, we have a leaning back into this. It's something that we can really lean back into ourselves.
As you say that, don't go that way sounds so different from you shouldn't do that. Like,
yes.
Right. And it may not be those exact words, but that sense of like, you'd be stupid to go down there would be something that your ego or your mother might say. Your intuition would never. It would be more of a sense of tender, keeping you safe. Yeah.
I'm yawning, and I want to talk about yawning as well.
Yeah.
Because we have some physical manifestations of our intuition sometimes. And what I've noticed, some people burp. When they're really tapped into their intuition, there's a gas. It's like the cauldron is bubbling up. And so we hear belching. And it's really curious to see when we dip into some of the ceremony where we're getting deep into intuition, how much belching really happens. It's incredibly fascinating. I yawn. I often yawn, but it's an incomplete yawn. I have the beginning of the yawn, but the yawn doesn't finish. It just like goes back down to nothing. So it's not like a tired yawn of anything. Some people have ringing in their ears. Some people have body twitches, or we've heard a lot of like tingles, like goosebumps is another physical manifestation of our intuition that comes up. And sometimes these are, I want to say, like warnings or alerts or the precursor to an intuitive message that's coming forward.
It's interesting. It's fascinating. As you're speaking about that, a lot of those little signs and symbols too are almost like a dropping into the body type of reaction. When you say you yawn, yawning is a calming signal in mammals. So dogs do it, cats do it, humans do it. And so there's almost that sense of tapping into the deeper calm, perhaps. And often it's an incomplete yawn because it's not a tired yawn. That calm down kind of signal, and it could be calm to your body for being prepared for whatever's being received, or it might be a calm to everybody else around you to make sure you stay safe as you connect with that intuition. There's something there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The physiological and the psychological as we connect them together.
Yeah. Yeah. The science and the woo, it always comes back together.
Always. The roads just run parallel is really what it is. It depends on how close or far apart they are at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so to really distinguish your intuition, like we've talked about how to distinguish it from your ego, but to distinguish it from fear or societal conditioning, it's equally tricky when you first start to practice it. But again, fear, I think we've spoken to this before, feels like a contraction in your body. Whereas intuition, it can be a back away, but it won't feel contracted. I often think about the fear of jumping into something exciting and new, that whole body yes that happens when we really want something, but it's freaking terrifying in a good way and not like a bad fear way. And that is that intuitive kind of like tingle. Oh, it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, but it's a whole body sensation and it is expansive. Whereas fear of making that commitment, that's like pure fear and maybe actually a bit of telling you to go away from it is contractive. Yeah.
You're reminding me as well, a lot of the time when I have intuitive hits, it's almost like a roller coaster ride in my heart. You were talking about the gut. For me, it's definitely heartfelt. And maybe this has something to do as well with our human design or something like our authorities. And I think that it's sort of this little like, I wouldn't even call it a contraction. It's like a dip and then a big expanse. And that's often what happens when I have a really big intuitive hit. It's like I've gone through a loop on a roller coaster, and it's a big signal to me to like, my intuition is knocking at the door like, hello.
Hi, will you please listen to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you listen when it's knocking?
Yeah, I will. I have a story for you actually, a little bit about my pup, my beloved pup Rubes. She she was really sick whenever we got her. She came from the streets of Mexico, eating junk off the streets, just living her best life. And when she came here, about 6 months later, she started having some really bad digestive upsets. And to spare details, it was pretty gory. And we took her through a series of a couple of different vets to try to figure out what was going on. And when we went to our, in quotations, regular vet, one of the things that they suggested was, aside from like, sure, give her a probiotic, and they wanted us to change her food from what we were feeding her to something that was more vet friendly, actually. And I had this really big intuitive hit that no, she should actually be eating like whole raw foods. This is where she should be. And in this same appointment, the vet was like, okay, we have this amount of vaccines that she should be given. Now, knowing what I know now about dog vaccines, and it just like sent me down a rabbit hole of research. And knowing what I know now about the immune system and vaccinating your pups while their immune system is compromised with things like upset tummies and inflammation and those sorts of things, it can be really detrimental to the longevity of your pup and their health and well-being. And so I was very adamant that no, she would not get these vaccines, and she especially would not get them now, but she probably would never get them. They were vaccines that are regularly given, but actually when we look at the history of this particular vaccine, it's not one that we need in Canada at all. If she was still in, but we give it in Canada. If she was still in Mexico, 100% I would be interested in giving it to her because there's a concern there, but there's not a concern here in Canada. And long story short, the vet asked me 3 more times, so 4 times total. And at the very last time, the vet gave me a story about why it was so important for me to give her this vaccine. And I caved. And I was like, okay, great, let's do it. Like, it's just one. Let's do it. So she was supposed to go to the back to get a vaccine, her nails clipped, and something else. And the only thing she came back with was the vaccine. The only thing. Her nails were not clipped, nothing. And so I took her home. Over the next few weeks, she got very sick. And I ended up bringing her to a holistic vet. I was so upset. I said, listen, these are the events that had happened. And he said, that was your intuition screaming at you. What you needed to do was leave the vet. And I had conditioning that said, well, this is my first dog, and maybe I don't exactly know what's going on here. And maybe I haven't done enough research, even though I had known about that vaccine and I had known that it had affected other dogs in a very detrimental way. And that it's not something that we actually need. And he said, like, you will never vaccinate her again like that. She will titer, which is this, this is a controversial topic, whether it be human or animal. And titering is seeing if they have the antibody, and not most conventional vets don't titer because that's not the regular practice. And he said, you will only titer her. And if something needs to happen, we will assess in that moment if she needs this or not. And it was in that appointment that things had really turned around for me, and Ruby and I's relationship completely changed with like, okay, what do you need? Because she is this dog that has very sensitive guts and has had many different health concerns over the last 5 years that I've had her. And it was such a strong mama bear moment for me of like, no. And then being asked, like being whittled down by the vet because she didn't hear me say no. And she heard me say no very well. She heard me say no, but she did not listen to me. And we actually never went back to that vet. And so it's always been this moment in time for us that now we like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And tapping into, okay, let's try this, and trusting, because my intuition was screaming at me so loudly in that moment, to know, okay, if she has to go in or has any health concerns, then immediately I tap into what's going on and check in with, okay, what are our risks? What's going on? What's going on here? Yeah. So that was a big long story about, having this mama bear moment and really understanding. And for myself as well, I check in with myself with my intuition all the time. I've been on this journey of trying to conceive for the last 18 months, and it's been an 18-month journey of checking in with exactly what it is that I need in this moment, and a difference between test results that contribute or confirm to what it is that I have intuited with my body, which is a really fun thing to do, versus having a practitioner say something to me and it feeling very wrong. There was a practitioner that said that there was something that was going on in my body, and I said, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Like, can we go deeper? Can we go deeper? So I think that it's something definitely for health that I use all the time.
I
Because
think
again, as somebody who feels things, I can feel, no, that doesn't feel right. Or
and
there's
I think you're
something going on. Sorry to interrupt. Something's
that's
going on
okay.
over here.
Yeah, no, I think you're bringing up a really important point to discuss, because I think this is probably the area of our lives as women that we get gaslit constantly by the medical society, the medical community, because women's bodies and women's health have not been studied as much, for one, but there's a long history of women's intuition being ignored by physicians,
No,
female
they've never been
physicians,
ours.
male physicians, it doesn't matter which kind. And by each other too. I'm sure my sister won't mind me telling the story that she had appendicitis. She was really unwell. She had a terrible pain in her stomach and she was vomiting. And her intuition said, I need to go in, like now. I should be going in. And my mom convinced her that it was probably just a GI thing.
Oh,
And she was telling me the symptoms. My mom was telling me the symptoms. I was like, it doesn't sound like GI. Like, she's not got anything coming out
anywhere
below,
else.
right? It's just coming up. I'm like, that's not GI. That's not how that works. But she waited a whole day before she went in, feeling terrible, and went in and waited for hours and hours and hours. And then within, I think it was less than 2 hours from the time the doctor saw her to the time she was in surgery, they were like, oh shit, this is real. And it's just such a perfect example of how her intuition was downplayed, her pain was belittled. That, and also that part of it was entirely my mother wanting to not have to be worried about her, or for her to worry about herself, which is fair but not helpful. and it was also, again, in the hospital, like that ability to triage, the fact that she had waited that long, there's a chance that the physician was like, well, she can't be in that much pain if she waited this long to come in, or who knows what happened at that end. Also, the hospitals in Calgary, like, you're lucky if you wait less than 6 hours, no matter what you've got going on. But it is this long history of us being told that our pain isn't real. And the irony of that is that having to suppress our discomfort and our pain, not being believed when we speak up, and so keeping it inside, actually creates more endemic health issues for women. So many autoimmune issues are linked to, as we talked about in our Secret Rage episode, they're linked to repressing and suppressing our emotions and what we really feel and what we really desire and our needs. And so we've created this healthcare model that not only doesn't believe women when they're unwell, but makes it worse by not treating them, and by having higher levels of stress. Because if we feel like we're crazy, that's stressful. It's really stressful.
I remember a friend of mine being very sick. And again, as a child, I didn't have somebody who advocated for my wellness, and I was definitely a very sick child. And so it's something that I've advocated, especially if you are the person who's being treated. Sometimes you're not asking those questions. And it's like, give me a platform, I will ask the questions. And a friend of mine was very ill, and I was like, I just need to take you to the hospital. Like, I think we just go to the hospital. Like, I don't think this is like a home solve. I don't think this is a natural, like a homeopathy. At this point, we need something else. We at least need a diagnosis for this. And on the way there, I remember her saying to me, like, are you are you sure I'm sick enough to be here? And I was like, well, we're not going home. Like, yes, the answer is yes. And it's just another way that we, especially as women, perpetuate not understanding our bodies or giving over our health to someone else that then does not fully understand, like you said with your sister or the doctor. Well, like, you've been in pain for this long, you must be okay, you know? No, we've stuffed this down for long enough that we think that we just need to tolerate. We need to continue to tolerate and to stay quiet and to, the other role of the good girl in our life. And if we're just that, then somehow we will magically heal.
Yeah. Yeah. Or yeah, we'll just be, we'll give it a few more days and we'll be better.
I remember when I was concussed a few years ago, and I originally went into the hospital, and the doctor there gave me a week off. And he said, let's just see what's going on here. You got to go into a concussion clinic, and it takes about 6 to 8 months to get in. Oh my gosh, 6 to 8 months to get into a concussion clinic in Ottawa. And at that point, and I tried to work the next week. I was like, okay, I got a week off. And especially as somebody who's like, didn't have healthcare, didn't have like sick days. I was like, okay, we just have to work like after that week. And I went back for a day. I didn't even go back for a day. I like attempted to go back for a day. And I spoke to my boss at the end of the day, and I was like, I don't think I can be here. Like, I literally don't think I can be here. They're like, go back to the doctor. Like, go see what they have to say. And so I made an appointment with another doctor. It was a woman at this point, and she was like, okay, I'm giving you a minimum of 2 weeks. You're going to contact me in 10 days. Let me know how you're feeling, and if we need to extend, you need to extend, because this is not something that you can go back to. It's not like you just don't go back, you don't jump back in after a concussion. And it's one of these invisible conditions that we just don't, it's still, that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Wow, 3 years ago. And I still have symptoms from it. I still have residual symptoms from this concussion. So
yeah, I'm not surprised.
yeah.
They're
Tell me a little bit about using your intuition in the birth room.
Yeah, it's such a cool thing when I think back on my career, and I couldn't always predict when things were going to go well or not going to go well, but I almost always could. I would very commonly get a super uncomfortable feeling of like, I don't want to be here, or I'm worried about being at home, especially if somebody was planning a home birth. There were certain situations where I just feel good on my way to the birth and not be thinking about all the things that could go wrong. A lot of midwives like to run through the scenarios of what they do in an emergency. And I'm like, that just stresses me out.
Right.
I know what to do in an emergency. I know that that'll all kick in. But there were births where I'd be going and I would be running through, and I would be like double checking, do I have everything in my kit? Yes, I do. I always restocked after births, but a few times where I would go be on my way to a home birth where I just, something in my body was like, we should not be at home. I don't feel comfortable. There's nothing about this pregnancy. There's nothing about this labor so far that would indicate that we shouldn't be at home. I've been at home for people who technically have more risk factors, but I felt fine about it. But every time I had that really strong feeling, and I told one story on the mini-sode at Christmas time, so I'll tell a different one today, but the one that really sticks out in my mind is this woman who I got along great with her. She was a wonderful client planning a home birth. Everything pointed to no problem. She wanted spontaneous labor, all of that jazz. And I was like, I just don't think we should be at home. And her water broke shortly after I got there, and there was meconium in the fluid. So that means that baby's pooped inside. Now, she was over 41 weeks. And so that in and of itself would not have been enough to worry me. Standard of care says that I should recommend going into the hospital, but I would often give that speech in a like, I have to recommend this, but when her water broke and there was meconium, all I could think was like, thank God. Thank God I have a reason for us to go in. And I had to really strongly recommend we go in. She really didn't want to. but I knew that we needed to be there. And sure enough, it was in the end when she was pushing, I can't remember all of the details, but she ended up being a forceps delivery, and it was quite an urgent one. Sometimes where people are like, oh, thank goodness we were in the hospital, we needed forceps. I'm like, yeah, but if we were at home, we'd just stop pushing and everything would have been fine. Like there's lots of times where there is actually quite a bit of time to get in, and we just have certain interventions to keep everybody safe while we make the transfer. But in this case, I remember after the birth just being like, thank God we went in. Thank God this baby gave me a reason. Thank goodness her water broke before she was pushing. Yeah. And there's so many little stories like that. And I didn't start to really trust that intuition until a little further into my practice. Had that woman had a baby with me maybe a year earlier, I might have caved to her saying, I want to be home. Do I really have to go in? I might have been a little bit less firm, but by that point in my career, I had enough evidence to be like, no, you're going. We're going.
We're going.
I don't know why, but I know.
Get in the car.
Get in the car before I have to call an ambulance.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I bet with birth, I remember reading a story. I don't remember if it was in an anime book or somewhere. Anyways, I don't remember. But the birth keeper was somebody who knew within the next 30 minutes about baby coming. And so she used this all the time. Part of it was, I think about clairalience, of it was a smell. It was a certain smell, like a woman's hormones change. And so using that as an indicator as well. But she had talked about knowing, okay, here we are. We're here. We're at the point. The show is on. The curtains have lifted.
Yeah, there's something that shifts. There's so many little signs that are not really tangible, and this woman clearly was tapping into something deeper too. But it's such a cool space for being in the power of the divine feminine. It really is kind of the whole thing. It's incredibly strong, and it's tender, and it's vulnerable, and it's raw, and it's so powerful. And if you can tap into the energies in those moments, which I did unknowingly, because at that point I still would have told you that energy healing was a load of garbage. All of that jazz. How far we've come.
And here we are. You are now.
Here I am now. Yeah.
I love this.
And there's so many fun ways to use our intuition too. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that people can play with it?
One of the trends that I'm seeing right now is interpretive tattoos. Have you seen this?
Oh my gosh, no.
Okay, so there's some tattoo artists out there. Actually, the only ones that I've seen so far on the Instagrams are women, and essentially I think have a consult with them, and then you say what part of your body you want the tattoo on and maybe how big it is or what your budget is, and they just start creating something intuitively as it unfolds on your body. So it's not something that you agree to beforehand or anything like that. For anybody who's had a tattoo, there's no stencil placement, there's none of that. It's just they start drawing on your body, and then all of a sudden this happens. So I really love this concept of an intuitive tattoo. I also love interpretive. I've named this interpretive dance, but really it's like ecstatic dance. There's a woman on Instagram as well that I follow that does a lot of intuitive dancing. And it's just so fascinating to watch her move, to be the observer of like, oh, what comes next? What comes next? And to have that as a flow and channel that moves through her, which I really love.
That's an easier one for our listeners to play with than jumping straight to letting someone tattoo you your body without you knowing what it is. Possibly, depending on who you are.
I'm ready for the intuitive tattoo.
I am too.
I also I found this, especially as a teacher and a yogi for so long. Our solo yoga practice can definitely be something that is intuitively guided. And when we do our solo yoga practice, we can do many things. Like we can let our ego guide us and have it be something that unfolds as we move along, or we can just literally, as I'm practicing, I'm like, what's next? Like asking the question, what's next? What's next? Without questioning how this fits into a flow or a structure of how I was taught to teach, let's say, for example, or taught to move. It's just what's next? What do I need next? What's next? And that's my favorite way to practice yoga.
I feel like I would have a hard time doing that because I would be like wanting the two sides to be even.
Oh, interesting.
That's just my like A type coming through.
Here's your desire
Because
to be guided. It's interesting that you say that. Whenever I taught yoga, we have some yoga teacher jokes, which are, if you're not mixing up your lesson rights, are you even a yoga teacher? And if you haven't forgot a side, are you even a yoga teacher? But I had this woman that I spoke about before, Mary Pierre, come to my class. When I first met her, she'd come to my class often, but when I first met her, after class one day, she said to me, "You're channeling your class." And I said, "I don't know what you mean."
Oh yeah, I remember you telling us this story.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. And so it's just what happens next. Like, okay, and next the unfolding. But the good thing about the left and rights is that you can always go, okay, we've done this on the right. Let's do this on the left. Okay, what's next?
Yeah.
Okay, what's
Yeah.
next? You want to talk about pulling cards?
This one actually I really struggle with because I like to know I like to know what the author wrote about what they mean.
Mm.
And I also really like playing with pulling cards and not reading the book that comes with it, or at least not reading it until I've done my own interpretation.
Yeah,
And
that's the
so,
key.
yeah, that's a fun way to, and it's more work that way. You have to actually be present and tune in. And I think that's probably part of why I'm like, nah, I'm just going to go straight to the book, because as with so much in life, it often feels, and I'm guilty of this, feeling like I'm kind of rushing through the practice, or I'm like, I got other things to do. I'm going to do this thing for me because I said I was gonna. And sitting with the card, thinking about the question, sitting with what the card looks like, what it feels like, what does it evoke, what comes to mind, like pulling in your clairs right here, right? So if you're a clairvoyant, what does the imagery spark? Does it create an image in your mind? Do you see things, or are you hearing messages? Are they dropping in with this? Is there something? It doesn't have to make sense. And what I love about playing with cards or other small stakes ways of starting to tap into and hone your intuition, dancing, yoga, these are all really small stakes, right? You're not going to drive off a cliff because you were intuitively taking lefts and rights. or quit your job and end up financially ruined. You won't. You'll be fine even if you do quit your job. But it's not these big stakes. So when you are starting to play with your intuition, following it, choosing the things that are easy to kind of let yourself be right about, right? And that growing of the trust in it. And that's a piece that, like, I touched on that in my birth stories. Every time my sense of this is all fine, I don't need to be worried, was confirmed, or this is not fine, I do need to be worried, was confirmed, it grew that trust in my knowing, and my ability to support clients outside like recommendations sometimes too. But yeah, that sense of letting yourself be right with the small things to help you grow your trust, so that when it's the bigger things, like your health, like the health of your family or your pets, you are confident in standing behind your decisions.
I think this is it as well, is like, the point that you just made, I want to clarify something. It's not like we don't make mistakes, in quotation, with our intuition. The whole story sometimes is not fully revealed. And that's why sometimes in our linear brain, we interpret that as wrong or a mistake. And then what happens is that more of the story is revealed. This whole bit about my healthcare practitioner saying, "Oh, I think it's a thyroid issue." And I said, "I don't have thyroid issues. It's not a thyroid issue." And so the first recommendation was to go on a medication. And I was like, "I will try this because you're telling me that it's great." And as soon as I picked it up from the pharmacy, there was an absolute resounding no. And absolutely not. And so the medication that was recommended was something that you take on like every 2 weeks. You increase your dose until you get to a certain dose, and then you're supposed to feel really great. And so that's usually around 6 weeks of taking the medication. Well, I lasted to about almost 5 weeks because I kept saying to myself, like I kept hearing, this is not it. This is not, it's not even that we're wasting our time. Like we're taking a big step back with this. And I made an appointment with them again, probably around 4 weeks, because I said, like, I feel awful. I feel terrible on this. It is so the opposite. You're supposed to feel like a runner's high. I was like, I can't sleep, and yet I'm tired, and it's just all of these things. So we continued to look at different aspects of this, and this one marker with your thyroid, 10% of the people who have an elevated level in your antibody, 10% of those people don't have an autoimmune. They just have an elevated number. And they can solve this by changing their diet. And they change their diet by eliminating some things, but also understanding what their allergies and sensitivities are, and then going on an elimination diet based on that. And so I did the allergy testing and started to eliminate all of the things that were on my list. And it probably took 6 months. So it could have been 6 weeks on this drug that was going to make me feel like I was running again. It was awful for me. And I kept saying to myself, I think it's something to do with my gut. I think it's something to do with food. And it's definitely something that has continued to move forward. So like it's not my thyroid. It's actually inflammation in my body that is looking like my thyroid because of the inflammation and an autoimmune, which my body is attacking itself. So we might think that we're wrong. We might think like, oh, actually, you're right. It is okay. So I think it's really encouraging for people to still, when things feel like they're wrong, like the tests have determined that actually maybe you do have an autoimmune. Here's the blood work. It's still my intuition yelling at me like, no, that's not it. To understand there's more of the story that needs to be revealed. Just as you talked about in that birth story, there's more that needs to be revealed here. So let's talk about accessing this.
Yes, let's do that. So there's lots of ways to access it. And as with every topic, I feel like we could go on for hours. However, really obvious ones to start tapping in are meditation and just sitting with a question and how you feel about it. And it could be something really simple. Maybe you meditate first thing in the morning and you're like, do I want oatmeal or cereal for breakfast today? Those are a tiny nuance, but your body's probably going to tell you which one you want. And so then having that thing and seeing how you feel. Or playing with, maybe the next morning you do the same thing and you eat the thing your body told you not to have and see what the difference feels like. See if you can see what happens when you ignore that intuition. Again, with something that's low stakes. Quiet time, alone time, especially when you're first starting to practice, it's easier to do if you take that pause, connect into your body. I really like to root. So doing a rooting visualization or some grounding Mayan breathing or something like that.
I often talk about intuition in alone time. So this is literally like free flowing alone time where we're not distracted by many things. We're just able to we're in the flow of whatever it is that we're doing. So we could be tasking, we literally could be cleaning the house, but in this moment of alone time, we're not necessarily interacting with other people. I also find travel, because we remove ourselves outside of the normal situation. And sometimes that allows for us to hear or feel, or however we receive our messages, a little bit more. And I also find that travel, we're tapping into it more because what do we want to eat? Where do we want to go? And we're letting our intuition guide us. And then I also have crisis, because often in crisis, we have a very strong intuitive hit. And we can choose to hear that or not. But if you look back into any moments in your life where there was some sort of crisis that happened, or just on the verge of that crisis, then sometimes you'll realize that you have had an intuitive hit of sorts, and your body has said, like, I don't know why I did this. I don't know why, like, there's no rationale to it. And so, yeah, crisis is definitely something that I find that is an easier way to access it. And that's why I always move towards this health part of things, like, food, super simple, movement, super simple, but also health in some capacity, super simple. We've just been taught to give our power over to somebody else who knows better than we do.
Yeah. That comes up for me with travel. Is when I'm traveling with a partner, it's really hard for me to just make the decisions, go where I want to go, eat what I want to eat, because we're managing for the other person as well, right? And Greg and I will end up at a stalemate because it's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you instead of just one of us taking the lead and letting that intuition guide. So being aware too how the people around you will influence your ability to listen, which is why practicing in those alone time, quiet spaces are so important. And it's a relationship that you build over time.
Yes.
Learning to trust it. Learning to trust it. What do you have to offer our listeners this week? Let's wrap this up for now, put a little bow on it, and we can always come back. Well, we're going to come back because the clairs deserve some more specific attention too. But what's have you got going on this week to offer our listeners?
On the intuitive front, I have, of course, my oracle readings that you can book with me on my website. And I also have something called an oracle reading with an intuitive coaching session. And this is just where those hits come in. And sometimes it looks very much like, I don't know where this is coming from, but I need you to make last week I'm reading with somebody and I was like, you need to go back to your matrilineal lineage and notice how your relationships have unfolded over the last little while. So that is something that gets incorporated into that. And the doors are open for Wild Woman.
Yay!
Come on in.
Get into Wild Woman. Yes, we've been talking about it forever. I'm so excited.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
What about you? What's going on for you?
Yeah, the doors are open for Unleash Your Inner Witch, and I made the decision last week to extend the bonuses just to everybody. I was like, screw the wait list. Everybody gets a bonus. You get a bonus. You get a bonus. You get a bonus.
We're Oprah.
We are Oprah. We are open. That is live. The doors will close on Monday, March 5th. So you've got lots of time to still hop in there. If you have questions, let me know. And if you're interested in some intuitive healing on the topic of intuition, this is an on-the-spot decision to offer for remote healing sessions for $250. Just going to do that. That feels like fun.
Yeah.
These are delivered weekly or bi-weekly for you, depending on what you prefer. And I drop into your energy on a day of the week that you choose. Send along a healing. I get those intuitive hits. I give you homework. I've told people to do funny things before. You never have to do homework if you're not comfortable with it. And then I drop in with a voice note for you on WhatsApp to give you the reading and the homework and troubleshoot anything that's coming up for you.
Yeah, do that. I had a healing session with Eileen and it was fantastic. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, yay, fun. And do a card reading with Ellie because that's also the best.
Thanks, Woo Crew. Thanks for tuning in with us as we talked about intuition this week. As always, if you have any questions, come on and find us over on Instagram at the Woo Curious Podcast. Wherever it is that you listen to this podcast, leave us a review. We want to hear from you.
Yes, please do. And these reviews are what get us found. So even just taking the 30 seconds to click that 5-star, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Woo Crew.